Avant-garde artists prided themselves on originality, on innovation, and the rejection, if not outright destruction, of the past. The avant-garde was populated with ideas and actions clustering around words in English with counterparts in other languages as new, revolutionary, alive, aggressive, anti, and so on, with a clear intent, rhetorical if not actual, to destroy both the existing aesthetic and socio-political order. Indeed, in the aesthetic sphere, the newest new opposed and swallowed the new that came before, from futurism and cubism and constructivism through to surrealism and Dada, on to abstract expressionism, conceptual art, environmental theater, pop art, and the abolition of hierarchies. The avant-garde divided roughly into what Alan Caprow called art like art and life like art. The dynamic tension Caprow theorized provided the energy for the avant-garde burst of the 60s and 70s. This activity raised very deep questions, which again were brought up last night, I think. What is performance? Where does it take place? Can anyone perform? Can a performance event, no longer a play or a concert, no longer theater, dance, or music as such, but an event, a piece, a work, proceed in a nonlinear way? And if so, what gives it unity? Does it need unity? What is the relationship or relationships among the performing arts, popular culture, politics, rituals, therapies, sports, and play, and the performances of everyday life, of business, of law, and of medicine? By the second decade of the 21st century, where we are now, these questions seem settled. Of course, performance can take place anywhere and can include anything. What's next is no longer a relevant question because anything can happen, will happen, and can be absorbed. That's part of this corporate thing. The corporation, the concept of the corporation is very, very flexible. It can absorb and use for its own advance. It's a very stable system. It's not a system that is likely to go away because it takes radical change and de-radicalizes it by accepting it, taking what's useful to its own and kind of easing out the rest. Theory's role in the formation of the conservative avant-garde is demonstrable. Restored behavior, surrogation, ghosting, haunting, citation, these are all words used by theorists. Restored behavior is my word, surrogation is Joseph Roach's word, ghosting is there's a moment. Citation is Derrida's word. Marvin Carlson. Ghosting and haunting are Marvin Carlson's words, and citation is Derrida's words, as is the deferral of meaning. All of these indicate the impossibility of defining, no less finding, originals. In the late 1960s, I began the thinking that led to various versions of restoration of behavior, which achieved its definitive shape in 1985 in the book Between Theater and Anthropology, which John referred to. Although I didn't know it then, I see now that I was undermining the ruling ideas of the historical avant-garde as expressed in my own theater works. In other words, my theory was saying, restoration was saying, there's nothing possible new, and I was doing work at exactly the same time which I was saying, gee, look at this new stuff. Restoration of behavior preceded and paralleled the thinking of feminist performance theorists such as Judith Butler, Peggy Fallon, Jill Dolan, and Sue Ellen Case, whose works took off in the late 1980s. The feminists often drew on the earlier thought of Foucault, Derrida, and Lacan, notions of iteration, citation, and historiography. A little later, in the archive and the repertoire, my colleague Diana Taylor, who originated and runs the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics, who's had their annual meeting once in Belo Horizonte, and will have a meeting again in Brazil in January, has written a brilliant book called The Archive and the Repertoire with large, she's a specialist in Latin American performance. She's actually Mexican, despite her name, Diana Taylor, and her first language is Spanish, and her second country is Canada, so don't be deceived by the word Diana Taylor. So her book, The Archive and the Repertoire, I'm glad it's coming into Portuguese. It's a very, very good book. Diana Taylor took up the problem of the unstable relationship between embodied practice and the archive. From the perspective of queer theory, do you guys know what queer theory is? Yes? How many know queer theory? Just a few. Well, queer theory is to some degree about homosexuality, but it really is much larger than that. It's theory that is based on a certain gay view of the world, but the notion of queering is a kind of twisting to look at something from a non-mainstream point of view. So there's a whole business of queer theory about gender bending, about identity shaping, about the location of plasticity, as it's technically known, of change, how deep into the human psyche and organism a change can occur. From the perspective of queer theory, Jose Munoz explored similar themes in Disidentifications and Cruising Utopia. All these scholars, and many others in the same vein, emphasize the performative construction of social identity. That's what's important. Performative construction of social identity and construction of gender, sexual orientation, and daily life roles, and the tensions between embodiment and recordings, and that word's various meanings. Some refer to the deadness of performance not as an inactivity, but as an uncanny presence as absence. Many artists in the making studied with these and like-minded scholars. In earlier epochs, emerging artists were trained by apprenticeship, not at school. Today, the Performance Studies Department at New York University, which I helped conceive in the late 60s and 70s, and which took its current name in 1980, is populated by artists taking a dip in the scholarly river. What began at NYU 35 years ago is increasingly the norm at many schools, where young artists learn the post theories undergirding the niche guard. Starving artists and waiting to be discovered have been replaced by applying for grants, landing a teaching gig, and being invited to festivals.